challenge. You know, in '96, I was in the room. Dr. Bill Perry called in the 9 global sinks and the 4 service chiefs. He probably only had 3 or 4 of his civilian leaders in there. We walked through the final 21 days to go to war with North Korea. We were that close. It scared me half to death. We told them, shut down Yongbyon plutonium processing or we'll bomb it. They said if you bomb it, it will be war. We said then it will be war. And there was no question what was going to happen. You know, in a campaign that would have lasted under 6 months, we were going to destroy the North Korean armed forces and take down the regime. It was an absolute slam dunk. The downside of it was, we thought there'd be millions and millions of refugees and probably a million casualties, and maybe 100,000 U.S. casualties. So it was just an atrocious potential outcome. And so we ended up with a crummy framework agreement and, you know, unverifiable, and they promptly started cheating on it. But at least we got it through another 10 years. Now we've got to face up to it again. That country has imploded. And the guy running it is a sociopath. We don't know how much credibility he's got with his own armed forces. The industry has ground to a halt, except they're selling drugs. The North Korean Navy is selling drugs, you know, peddling methamphetamine off the coast of Japan, and peddling heroin into Australia last month. Their diplomats are selling drugs. Maybe they're making $1 billion a year out of heroin and methamphetamine. They're selling missile technology. They're capable of selling nuclear fissile material and knowledge. We got to do something about it. And I think the current approach to the administration is probably a pretty sensible one. Try and sort out the sort of conflicting agendas of the regional partners and say, you've got to join us in this. This isn't a U.S. problem. This is a regional problem. You know, if they end up with 100 to 300 nuclear weapons a decade from now, the people most at risk are the Japanese, the South Koreans, and the Chinese, not us. I totally support Secretary Rumsfeld's whole notion, which he advanced, on getting the U.S. off the demilitarized zone, to not leave us immediate hostage to North Korean intransigence. We've got strategic options. We could put that money, take the 37,000 troops out, put the money into ballistic missile defense, and enhanced naval capability in the area, and say, okay, you know, down the line, the sense of insecurity ought to be in China and Japan. And by the way, you know, what are the Chinese thinking? Well, in the short run, they don't want 10 million starving North Koreans in China. And in the short run, they want to have some leverage to stop the methamphetamine production coming out of North Korea into their country, although that's now not too big a factor since there is a gigantic drug problem in China, both heroin and methamphetamines. But, you know, the Chinese got that short-range concern. In the mid-range, I don't think the Chinese want us out of South Korea. I don't think they want a unified Korean peninsula. And what are most of the regional partners really worried about? The Japanese. You know, it's going to take them another 100 years to recover from what happened in, you know, 36 through 45. Japanese, it comes as a surprise to military audiences. Right now, their Air Force and Navy are among the most sophisticated on the face of the earth and the most powerful within a couple thousand miles of Tokyo. Ground self-defense force, third rate. But they're sitting on 20 tons of plutonium. The Japanese, you know, take it forward a decade, could have 4,000 nuclear weapons. So, you know, I think the U.S. role appropriately ought to be, look, this is a Chinese, South Korean, Japanese problem, somewhat to the Russians, and to other regional partners, and the U.S. ought to play a positive role. You know, I saw Fidel in 2 palaces. He's living like the Czar. And his minister, his young 40-somethings are all beautiful suits and bilingual, and they travel, and they have, you know, they have Eastern European or Russian cars, and so they're still doing okay. The rest of the thing come apart. It's the damnedest thing I ever saw. There's no lights on in the city at night. There's no paint. There's no, nothing works. And the worst part about it, I had one 7-hour session straight with Fidel. Fidel, Raul, interpreter, head of the household, and the deputy commander of the armed forces, some hotshot 45-year-old, looked like a German guy, deputy general. He never said a word for 7 hours. Fidel did 95% of the talking, Raul 4%. Household guy made a few comments. And I thought, God, you know, there were huge grins on this guy's face several times with me responding to Fidel. Fidel's not used to dealing with other adults. He is not used to it. He can't tolerate interventions. But I thought, you know, the worst thing about Cuba right now is if you want to cook a second chicken tonight in a hotel in Santiago, you got to call Fidel and you got to listen to 7 hours of his BS. And this guy must have heard that shtick 150 times in the last year. He must be suicidal. The thought of going over to listen to Senator Levin's here and we got to go through the shtick again with him. That thing is coming apart. And we're not going to do very well in solving its aftermath either. We can't have a decent discussion inside the U.S. government. I personally think we ought to lift the economic embargo mostly. We ought to lift the tourist ban completely. We're not engaging these young people that are emerging as the future leadership. Right now in the Ministry of the Interior, there's a bunch of 40-year-olds that have been talking about when this guy dies, what's going to happen. You know, there's no history of democracy in Cuba. It's going to be a guy with a gun and a badge that's going to take over the country. So we ought to be in there influencing those events. I think it's a missed opportunity. Fidel's locked in 59. We're locked in 61. We ought to break out of this. But it's politics.